On January 3, 2026, something pretty dramatic happened. The U.S. launched a military operation right into the heart of Venezuela and captured its president. So how on earth did we get to this point? What was the official reason? And, what happens now? Let's get into it and unpack this whole unprecedented event.
And just hours after the operation, this is what President Trump said: "We're going to run the country." I mean, that quote alone sent shockwaves all over the world. It immediately tells you how high the stakes were and just how unusual this whole intervention was. It's a statement that really makes you think about sovereignty, international law, and America's place in the world.
So, let's just walk through that day. It all kicked off early in the morning. A massive strike on Caracas, explosions being reported. Then, in a move that honestly sounds like something out of a movie, the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force captures President Maduro and the First Lady. By the afternoon, they weren't even in Venezuela anymore. They were on U.S. soil. And by that evening, Maduro was sitting in a federal detention center in Brooklyn. It was so fast, so shocking. In less than 24 hours, an entire country's leadership was just gone.
Now, a raid like this doesn't just happen out of the blue. It was actually the final piece of a military campaign that had been going on for months, called Operation Southern Spear. And what's interesting is how analysts are describing it. They're calling it a hybrid, kind of like a mix of the war on drugs and the war on terror. It really blurs the lines between what you'd think of as a police action and a full-on military operation.
And to really get the military picture here, just look at the forces involved. I mean, on paper, Venezuela's numbers look pretty big, right? 200,000 troops, and they claim to have a militia of 4.5 million people. But the U.S. brought overwhelming tech. We're talking a full carrier strike group, which is basically a floating military base, plus these advanced stealth F-35s. Venezuela's main defense was its Russian-made air defense systems, and you can bet the U.S. military had a plan for those.
The road to this conflict was methodical. It built up step by step over 5 months. It all started with this huge military buildup in the Caribbean, the biggest we've seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then, the U.S. started hitting ships at sea. After that, a full blockade on oil tankers. But the real turning point, the moment things got serious, was in late December with that first drone strike on Venezuelan land. That really set the stage for the final act, capturing Maduro himself.
Okay, so how does the U.S. government even begin to justify an action this dramatic against another sovereign country? Let's break down the official story coming out of the Trump administration.
The whole argument, literally the entire justification, hangs on this one central accusation, that Nicolás Maduro wasn't a president, he was the leader of a narco-terrorist organization. That specific wording is everything because it completely reframes the situation. It stops being a conflict between two countries and becomes a counterterrorism operation.
And they didn't just pull this out of a hat. You can see a very deliberate process to build a legal case for this. First, they labeled the so-called Cartel of the Suns a foreign terrorist organization. Then came a really big move, an executive order calling fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. That seriously raises the stakes on drug trafficking. And then the final crucial step, they designated the entire Maduro regime as a terrorist organization. In the eyes of U.S. law, the government of Venezuela was no longer a government, it was a terrorist group.
And that, of course, brings us to the messiest, most debated part of this whole story. Was any of this actually legal?
This is the question that everyone around the world is asking. Was what the U.S. did justified under international law?
At the very heart of this whole debate is one specific rule, Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. This thing is a cornerstone of our modern world. It was put in place after World War II for one reason: to stop exactly this kind of thing from happening. It says flat out that countries can't use military force against other countries. Period.
And listen to this quote from Jeffrey Robertson, who used to be the president of a UN war crimes court. He says the U.S. has committed the crime of aggression, which, he points out, the Nuremberg trials called the supreme crime, because all other war crimes are basically born from it. I mean, that's about as strong a condemnation as you can get.
But there is one loophole in the UN Charter. It does let countries use force in one very specific situation: self-defense. So the question is, could the U.S. make that argument stick?
So here's how the debate plays out. The U.S. argument is basically, we were defending ourselves from drugs like fentanyl by attacking the source. But legal experts are pushing back hard on that. They say that under international law, self-defense means you're about to be attacked with military force. And, as one expert put it, absolutely no one was suggesting that the Venezuelan army was about to invade Florida.
So, the operation's over, Maduro is in a U.S. jail. What are the consequences? What's the fallout from all this, both for Venezuela and for the rest of the world?
Well, the reaction from around the world was immediate and pretty divided. You had major powers like China calling it a clear violation of international law. Key allies like the UK basically said, hey, we had nothing to do with this. The UN was deeply alarmed. Back in Caracas, the vice president called it a kidnapping. And even here at home, you had senators like Mark Warner asking, wait a minute, does this mean any big country can just go grab the leader of a smaller country now?
And that worry about setting a precedent just keeps coming up. That same legal expert, Jeffrey Robertson, lays out a potential worst-case scenario. He's worried that this gives a green light to other big powers, like China, to do the same thing. That they might look at this and think the international rulebook has just been torn up.
It's also really important to remember that this military strike didn't just happen in a vacuum. This came after years of the U.S. piling on the pressure, especially with economic sanctions targeting everything from individuals to the country's oil industry. They were trying to isolate the Maduro government for a long time. This strike was just the final explosive step after a long campaign of economic warfare.
So what can the rest of the world do about it? Well, the UN Security Council is supposed to be the place to handle stuff like this. But here's the catch. The United States is one of 5 countries that has a veto, so it can block any attempt to condemn its own actions. It's a situation that legal experts are basically calling impossible. There's no way to enforce the rules.
And that really leads us to the final, critical question we're left with. This whole operation has shaken the very foundation of the international system. If one of the most powerful countries on Earth can break the rules and then veto any consequences, it raises a really uncomfortable question for all of us. What's to stop the next invasion?